Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Gibson, and this is the Gr8Wyte Experience. Hi everybody, welcome to the Gr8Wyte Experience, the show where I talk about anything and everything of interest. My name is Taylor Gibson. Thank you for listening. Today's episode is one that will unfortunately be recorded with mixed emotions and a heavy heart, as this past week, fans of professional wrestling lost not only a Hall of Fame talent in the ring, but a game-changing and trailblazing figure out of it, the man known as Razor Ramon, also known as Scott Hall, who unfortunately passed away on March 14th at the age of 63. And joining me for this episode is a guest who I've previously had on the show, and he's going to be making a long-awaited return. So please welcome back to the show, Mike the Bod. Mike.
Hey, how's it going, man?
You know, I wish it was under happier circumstances. I really do.
Agreed. It's been, for wrestling fans, especially wrestling fans from the early to mid 90s, and even into the 2000s, I guess, too. Pretty somber week.
It has been. And honestly, Mike, it's one of these things where this week I actually was going to ask you regardless to come on the show and talk about something wrestling themed, given that WrestleMania X8, which was the final WrestleMania held in Canada, was held tomorrow, 20 years ago, on March 17th, 2002, at the Toronto Sky Dome, which would actually be Scott Hall's final WrestleMania as a performer, where he would lose to Stone Cold Steve Austin in a match that is not widely regarded as one of the greatest matches of all time. And it's a very unfortunate match in WrestleMania history. But given the passing of Scott Hall, I feel that it's still appropriate to get together today, not only because, again, like I said, WrestleMania X8 would be 20 years old tomorrow, but today is 316 day, and given Scott Hall's final WrestleMania match was against Stone Cold, so I feel it's really appropriate. So we're going to start off this episode, Mike, by just giving our honest thoughts about Scott Hall as a performer, because, you know, for myself, I always associate him as a member of the New World Order when I first got into wrestling in the late 90s. And then I later knew him as Razor Ramon because my brother had some of the In Your House VHSs and some of this stuff. But for yourself, like, what is your honest thoughts?
So my first impressions of him were Razor Ramon. And because I was actively watching like all the WWF shows at the time, like Superstars and Main Event, all the stuff in the early 90s. Even, I guess, Raw was still, I guess, around the corner then too. But I can vividly remember, and they've seen a lot of them over the last week, the Razor Ramon vignettes before he actually even debuted. So like the building up of his character, and just thinking like, man, this guy is fucking cool. Part of my language, but like he was perfect. Like, it was so believable. Like, especially as a little kid, as like a little 10-year-old, you're just like, wow, this guy is such a cool badass. Like, it's awesome. And then as a performer, he was not like, I guess it depends on like your favorite wrestlers or your favorite wrestling style. He was never like a blow your mind match type of performer, except for the ladder match he had with Shawn Michaels, which was unbelievable. But he was always a really great worker. Like, he always had really solid matches, and he always knew how to put people over. 1, 2, 3 Kid, aka Sean Waltman. That doesn't happen without him taking an L. And so that was like my early impressions of him. And then obviously when he jumped over to WCW with Kevin Nash, it was just like, what is, like, this doesn't happen. Like, that literally changed wrestling. And Scott Hall was the guy that went on TV and did it. And then you got the New World Order, and you got the Monday Night Wars, and like all of that. Just, he's a trailblazer in a lot of ways for the modern wrestling that we know today. But yeah, great performer. Everything I heard about the guy, he was always a stand-up guy. Unfortunate that he had so many demons, I guess. And it makes it even more sad that he got himself cleaned up really well. And this happened. But Yeah, no, great wrestler, great performer. Yeah, and definitely one of like my very, very, very first wrestling memories is Razor Ramon.
Absolutely. And like I said, I always associate him as a part of the New World Order with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan. But for myself, even as somebody who watched wrestling as a kid and didn't really get back into it as an adult, I really didn't truly appreciate his in-ring work until I got back into wrestling as an adult. And it's funny because in wrestling, like in sports, you always hear about the five-tool performer. And Scott Hall's not a guy who doesn't get mentioned in the same vein as a Randy Savage or a Steve Austin or
Yep.
even a Shawn Michaels. And
Yep.
I know you were just mentioning like he would put on great matches, he would put people over, but it's weird for as much of a trailblazer and as much as he's really done for the wrestling, he doesn't get spoken about in that same conversation.
And I think I heard someone say this week, like he would have been a main event guy if he stayed at WWF. Like 100%. He was big, he was jacked, he had charisma, like he was everything Vince McMahon wanted in a superstar. and but he left with Kevin.
Yep.
And he stuck with Kevin. And like they stuck together. It wasn't Scott following Kevin. It was like they stuck together. It just, I think he kind of gave that up. He gave up that run, which is, it's kind of a shame he never even got a run in WCW either. He got tag runs, but he never really had a singles run that I can recall.
No, I can't remember off the top of my head. But I mean, in fairness, I mean, when you think about his time in WCW, of course he would be associated with the NWO, like we mentioned. But I mean, when you look at some of the people they had on that roster, where you had Hulk Hogan on the roster, you had Ric Flair, you had Sting, you had Goldberg, you had all these big times. But even in WWF, he was never given a titles run. He was an Intercontinental Championship 4 times. Yeah. Which, and I know even for yourself, I think you would probably know more than I would. Like at one time, the Intercontinental title was more respected more than
the world title. Oh yeah, like it was not what it is today, which is like an afterthought. Like back then it had meaning, and like you looked at guys like Shawn Michaels, like Razor Ramon, Rick Martel, Macho Man, Tito Santana, Mr. Perfect. Those guys you picture with the Intercontinental belt. And like that's like it was so meaningful. It wasn't bigger than the title or the world championship, but it was like very, very, very highly regarded and respected.
Yeah, but another guy you didn't mention was Bret Hart. And I know when you had last time we were talking about our favorite Canadian wrestlers and Bret Hart came up, but I remember Bret saying in an interview that the Intercontinental title at the time was seen even higher than the world title because that was seen as the company saw you as a great worker, not as a champion.
Yeah. Yeah. You were a good professional wrestler, which is, I think you see a lot more of that conversation coming back today. And it's also hilarious that tonight on Dynamite, Jericho talking about being a sports entertainer all over again. It's just picture perfect. But you've kind of got this refocus now because you've got so many more options for wrestling of like pro wrestling. And then you get different styles of pro wrestling. It's just like music. But this idea of professional wrestling at its core seems to be coming back a little bit. You're seeing it in AEW with Danielson and Moxley and William Regal. You hear just like a lot of the mouthpieces talk about like professional wrestling as like the thing again. And I could see back then, like you look at the folks that had the Intercontinental, they were all incredible workers, like all of them. They could work with anybody and make any match look amazing.
Yeah, well, look at Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels was a perfect example because, again, he wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but he made guys who were so much bigger, yet not as talented, look great. Like he made Diesel. He made Kevin Nash look great in the ring. He made all these guys look good in the ring. And talking about Scott Hall, and of course with the Riz Ramon gimmick, it was one of those gimmicks that even at the time, it was oddly dated, yet it was fresh and believable. And that's the key word, is believable. Because again, the WWE's new generation was full of so many dumb gimmicks, from Repo Man to the Goon to all these kind of occupational sort of gimmicks. And along comes Razor Ramon, who is obvious inspiration by Tony Montana from Scarface. And everything about even Scott's presentation was unique. The toothpick was different. The gold chains were different. The slick back hair, like everything at the time, because even like the wrestlers that came before him was all about these loud, over the top personalities. And here comes Razor, and he's strutting to the ring, and he's not talking. He almost kind of had like a Jake the Snake thing to him.
Yeah.
Where he kind of spoke in a register that wasn't super over the top.
Yep. Yeah, well, Jake's a great comparison. Jake, both of them could talk, both of them could promo, but it was how they said stuff. It was like how they moved in the ring, like their move set and all of that. And both of them had that psychology, I think. But yeah, I think someone like Razor, it's a great comparison to Jake. Great comparison to Jake.
100%. And even, of course, post-career, they would both be linked together with the documentary, The Resurrection of Jake the Snake, where you watched not only Jake, but you saw Scott Hall in a position, in a moment in his life where everything was going so bad. Everything was dark. Even like this is the E60 segment they did on him where you saw he was in a rough position in life. And it's just like, oh, geez, I don't know how much longer this guy's got to live. But even in the Resurrected Jake the Snake, you see a guy, and talking about Scott Hall seems like a guy who got such a big heart. He seems like he was haunted by a lot of his demons, and he didn't want to hurt anybody in his life. No. And it really came across. Even in the interviews, they talked about him when he's laying on the bed and he's just like, I know that my demons have hurt a lot of people, and he didn't want to do that. Yeah.
No, I think you could even see him as a performer being like that. Like, there's so much ego in wrestling. No one wants to be put over. No one wants to like be the guy to put someone over potentially, or no one wants to be put over top of. No one wants to have like their placement or ranking in the card go down. But I've like just read numerous threads on Reddit and just even on Twitter this week too, of just like all the guys that Razor helped put over in his career. And it just like, if he's that type of person in professional wrestling, which is not known for that type of personality, you can only imagine what it's like in real life, and just like potentially like a big teddy bear.
100%. And even when talking about Scott, and you made a great point there where he has all these people that came out talking about Scott Hall and how he put them over, how he was such a great man. And I mentioned this on Third Line Plug, my hockey podcast, where I said, Scott's one of these guys that from Steve Austin to Kevin Nash, all of these ex-wrestlers always spoke of Scott as being one of the smartest minds in the business. And it was just because his demons always screwed him up. And if he was clean, he probably would be running a wrestling promotion today. He was that smart. Yeah. And even when talking about people he put over, the big one for me is Diamond Dallas Page. Because even in WCW, when the Hogans and all these guys started coming over, DDP was kind of a mid-card guy. Yep. Good worker, but didn't really see a lot of potential. Nash and Scott Hall come over and they go, no, we want this guy to be big. Yep. And they try to convert him to being part of the NWO, and he rejected them on Nitro.
I remember that. And I think there's been so much stuff about Scott Hall popping up this week, obviously. I think him and Dallas were paired together in like the 80s.
Yep. The Diamond
Star. So like they go back a long time. So like that's pure friendship, trying to like I know in wrestling it's especially at that time it was like you want to get your friends over, or like the more your friends get over the more you get over and stuff like that. So I get like, yeah, maybe not the coolest thing, but at the same time, someone like Dallas who had great charisma, a good worker, good safe worker, why not get a little bit of a push from guys who had a lot of clout in the company? Go for it.
And of course, DDP became a world championship after that. And while his run in WWE wasn't amazing, we're talking about, and you mentioned that with trying to get his friends over, the Clique is one of those things that is not super talked highly regarded among the boys. Most notably, like Jim Cornette, who has had a lot of opinions of a lot of wrestlers over the years. He's been very critical of the Clique, but he even said on his podcast that Scott was one of the best worker out of all of them, with Shawn Michaels. But the Clique is one of those things where I mean, the big thing that comes out of the Click is the curtain call. Because that, along with the Montreal Screwjob, you want to talk about two moments in wrestling that kayfabe died.
Yeah, which
You want to talk about
never happened back then.
into the earth.
Yeah. When you got guys like Jim Cornette who live and die by kayfabe, who are probably just like, you don't do this. You don't do this at Madison Square Garden too. Like, it's just perfect. Absolutely perfect.
But you even made a great point last time you were on. I'm talking about Bret Hart, where you feel that Bret, he took himself and the business too seriously. But again, when thinking back at that, it's like, well, why wouldn't he? He grew up in it. This is all he's ever known, right? Like,
absolutely.
It's too hard. Like, when you have guys in his basement getting stretched and everything that was going on with him, of course he's going to think, obviously he knows like it's all a work, it's all that, but part of him in the ring is like, okay, well, this is my life. This is my family business.
Yeah. This is like, I bet like in some way, shape or form, outside of the ending being predetermined, there's physicality in the ring. And Bret, I think, has inspired a ton of people, not just from a physicality standpoint, but from a psychology standpoint. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on Bret too at some point. But man, like you look at guys like Danielson, guys like Punk, guys like Moxley, Daniel Garcia, like these guys who, like, it's that idea of like pro wrestling coming back. But yeah, Bret was literally the best there ever is, the best there ever was, the best there ever will be. And they get a hockey team after you too.
That's true. Which of course, I was reading Theo Fleury's autobiography, and he talked about how Bret became a part of it. And I think Bret was supposed to include like $250,000, but he only included 100,000 because he thought that his name was much more bigger than that. But that was actually, speaking about the Calgary Hitmen, on March 5th, they actually brought back the pink jerseys.
Really?
They did, yeah.
Nice.
Bret was even doing the ads for him, but so that was really cool.
Awesome.
So bring it back to Scott Hall for a second. Now, of course, his run in WWE, like I said, like he won the Intercontinental title 4 times, didn't win the WWE title, but he had 2 iconic matches that come right off the top of my head. Of course, there was an episode of Raw, I believe in 93 or 94. I apologize if I can't remember the year, where he got pinned by the 1-2-3 Kid.
Yep.
Also known as Sean Waltman.
Yep.
Turn him face. You want to talk about a moment because Razor came into this, and he was, again, we're talking about trailblazing. He came into the WWE as somebody who was a heel, but over time became a cool heel. As you saw it with when Steve Austin first came, when the NWO first came up, when you had all of these guys who were now cool heel. It's cool to be a heel.
Yeah, it's cool to be the bad guy.
Like, and I think a perfect example is MJF. You hate to love him in the ring.
I also like he's so good at what he does. He's so good. Like the lines he crosses, I don't know how he crosses half the lines he does. It doesn't make any sense.
No, but even like the one episode of Dynamite where they had Brian Pillman Jr. in the ring and he referred to his mother as Methany.
Yep.
I was like, ooh.
God.
And of course, this came out right after the Dark Side of the Ring episode on Brian Pillman came out. And I was like, ooh.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
Obviously, I understand. Like they probably, I'm sure MJF says to these guys backstage, he's like, okay, listen, I'm going to say this, and this. Just react.
Yeah. Just go with it. I don't believe it. It's character work. But man, yeah. No, but I kind of going back to your original point, like, yeah, Razor was kind of that cool heel. And he kind of got that, like, it was cool to see, like I can actually remember that 1-2-3 Kid match. I can remember it, like 1-2-3 Kid diving off the top rope and Razor like losing his mind after he lost. But you didn't see a lot of that back then. You didn't see the young guys getting like being able to go over on TV, let alone like a house show or something like that, like on TV. Like 1-2-3 Kid beat Razor Ramon. That's wild. Like that's a David and Goliath story right there. And that's what elevated 1-2-3 Kid.
It did. And of course you see Sean Waltman throughout the rest of his career where he was 1-2-3 Kid. He went from 6 in the NWO, comes back to WWE with D-Generation X as X-Pac. And when talking about iconic matches, of course, you mentioned this earlier in the episode, the ladder match, WrestleMania 10, was Shawn Michaels. Ladder matches nowadays, I mean, it's such a common thing within WWE and even in AEW. You saw this at the most recent Dynamite with Britt Baker and God, I'm apologize. I'm blanking on the
Rosa.
Yeah, Rosa. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tonight on Dynamite.
Yeah.
That at one time, and I'm sure in WCW, in New Japan, and all the other promotions, it was a common thing where you saw ladder matches, but WWE you never saw this.
No,
this is a brand new thing, and they're doing this on a pay-per-view.
Yeah, pretty wild. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I watched this match like 2 or 3 weeks ago, just because I knew it was great. It was a unification match.
I believe so. Yes, because at the time Shawn held both titles because Shawn got in trouble and he wouldn't drop the belt.
Yeah, he got suspended for 30 days and came back with the belt, which is hilarious. But also, I think telling just, again, like those guys were buddies at that point too. But that match still holds up today. Like, it's not about the big like there are some crazy spots in that match. But it's not like a TLC match. It's nothing like that. It's using the ladder like as a tool to tell the story, not necessarily as a weapon or as a gimmick. It's meant to help like tell that story. And those two did it absolutely perfectly. Like you have Razor, who's 6'7", probably 275, 280 maybe. And you got little Shawn Michaels. So it's, again, like a little David and Goliath thing happening. And they both played to their strengths of using the ladder in the match. And it wasn't like the ladder wasn't the focal point in the match either. It was literally there to get the belt, or it was there to help achieve the story that they were trying to tell.
Yeah, it's not like when, and we talked about this on the last one we were on with WrestleMania 17, the 6-way tag between the Hardys, Dudleys, and Edge and Christian, where you had the TLC match for the titles. It wasn't anything like that. And you're absolutely right. It told a story. And the big thing I remember from that, well, two things. Shawn diving off the ladder, which is funny because Scott said in interviews, like he would sign that picture and look at him and goes, I won this match, right? but the other thing that I don't think, and I think Scott and Shawn, I think they did a thing with WWE on YouTube where they talked about the match where Scott threw Shawn into it and Shawn runs, hits it, and kind of does a upward roll up and over the ropes.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is so, and that's why Shawn was always one of my favorite performers because, again, in wrestling, a guy my size who's probably 6 foot, 230 pounds, is a small guy.
Yeah.
When you see a guy, and Shawn Michaels didn't look that big. He didn't look like he was 225 pounds, but when he gets thrown into it and he just does a lot of gymnastic-esque moves in the ring, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. Yeah.
Shawn is definitely innovative, was definitely a high flyer for the back in the day. Mm-hmm. Had some crazy matches with Undertaker, and some amazing matches outside of the screw job with Bret. God, like he, outside of just being a great worker, his character, like, was amazing. Like him kicking Marty Jannetty through the barbershop with Beefcake. I remember that and like being so mad as a kid. I was probably like, I don't even know how old I would have been, 7 or 8, and being like, boo you, Shawn Michaels, that's Marty Jannetty, that's your brother, why are you doing that? But that's what bred out the Heartbreak Kid, and like that gimmick still holds today. Yeah, which is like, that's impressive. Like, would Razor Ramon in the way that it was done in the early 90s hold today? Maybe not, but that gimmick could still be done, but it couldn't be done because now we don't have Razor.
Yeah, I don't know if the gimmick would hold up as well. I do think when Scott went to WCW, I think just kind of just being himself, I think that's what really, really elevated him to the next level. And we really haven't talked much about his run in WCW, because when he jumped ship in 1996, when the episode of WCW Nitro, I can't recall whose match it was, but all you see is him walking down the aisle, and it was unannounced, unexpected. Of course, this is pre-internet. Nobody knew this was going to happen. And I can't remember who made the comment, and they said so that the internet has ruined wrestling because there is no more surprises.
No.
Surprises are ruined.
Yeah.
And for myself, when I look back on this, and a couple of years ago, I had the Scott Hall DVD that WWE put out, and they talked about this. And when he came down the aisle, he came over the barricade and he cut the infamous promo of, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here."
Yep.
That's a moment where you're just like, oh my God, there's a WWE guy in a WCW ring. What is going on?
Well, because back then, unless you were getting Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer by mail, which was like that was the old forums, like, well, that's how you kind of learned about wrestling back in the day from insiders. No one's contracts were talked about. Like, no one talked about like when so-and-so's contract set to expire and what their options are. Like, you never really did that. Or if they did, I like maybe as a kid, I just never heard it. But like, to your point, we know too much about what's happening behind the curtain now. And I think there's a fine line to it. Like, I think I still like, I forget, I think it was Full Gear when Adam Cole comes out. That was a surprise because everyone was expecting Danielson, but no one was expecting Adam Cole that soon. But like, and that didn't really get out. So it's like you kind of miss that, like, whoa, that's the coolest shit in the world. You don't have those moments anymore. But back then, as a kid, and you see that happening, it's just like, why is WWF on WCW TV?
Yep.
Like, what is happening here? And why is Razor Ramon dressed in a jean jacket and in jeans? Like, he still has the little hair curl going down. He's still got the toothpick. It's like, it's still Razor Ramon, but it's like real life Razor Ramon now.
Yeah, but even on like the succeeding episodes of Nitro where Eric Bischoff is saying, okay, well, why are you here? Like, what is going on here? Is there going to be an invasion of WWE guys? And he goes, what? He brings back up, and all you see is Scott pointing behind him. He goes, what? I'm here. What are you talking about? And all you see is his hand pulls Eric behind him, and there's Kevin Nash.
Yeah,
who just in WrestleMania 11 was the WWE champion.
Yep. That was literally that's a game-changing moment for professional wrestling. That's like, it gave us the Monday Night Wars. It gave us Austin. It gave us The Rock. It gave us Mankind. It gave us the NWO. It gave us
the Attitude Era.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And you don't have DX without the NWO. No. You don't have Val Venus.
Well, think of it. You don't have the Elite. You don't have Bullet Club. No. You don't have any of the factions that came after it, right? Because the Outsiders, and then with the NWO, it trailblazed everything because it was like, okay, here's a heel faction that was cool, that was going to take over. And now you see it being recreated every company from New Japan to WWE. Yep.
It was a special moment in time for wrestling. I was talking to someone about this recently. Like, I feel like now it's kind of feels like that again. And I say that as a 40-year-old versus me being like a 14, 15, 16-year-old with all this happening. But it's exciting when wrestling is exciting. And like, wrestling is really boring when there's not a lot of competition or not a lot of options. And the way that I watched Monday Night Raw yesterday for the first time in years because everyone was saying that Cody Rhodes was going to show up. So I'm like, okay, I want to kind of see what this is going to look like. He doesn't show up. It's hot garbage. I'm sorry. It's unwatchable. Like, it is not professional wrestling. It's definitely sports entertainment. It's for me, it was like borderline unwatchable.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem that WWE's really run into the programming over the last several years. Not only just because AEW is now an alternative to WWE, but just because you go from 2 hours to 3, and now you're trying to cram so much into it, and it's just like, okay, well, what do you cut really? Like, what do
Yeah.
you cut out of it? And I think more for myself, and I unfortunately haven't watched Raw in a few years. I think for me, I don't know about yourself, I found that the female wrestlers were much more engaging, but much more entertaining to watch than the male wrestlers, because of course they
Oh,
tried
100%
the
agree.
women's revolution and all that stuff that Stephanie McMahon was pushing.
Yep.
Saw it with like the Becky Lynches when Paige was still in WWE, Alexa Bliss, which unfortunately I really hate that they turned him face, because it's kind of like Britt Baker in AEW. I think I wasn't really crazy about her as a face when they turned her heel. She took off.
She was perfect. Yeah. And it's like it's like what they did with Roman. They kept Roman a face for so long because it's just like, no, he's our John Cena. Like, he's the next guy. Like, we need the face of the company. And like when they finally let him turn heel and like be a heel, like now I can be like, okay, now I like Roman Reigns. This is the Roman Reigns I've always wanted to see, not this cheesy guy who's trying to like be just something he's clearly not. He's a great heel. And actually, it would be interesting to see him turn face, not soon, because I like his character right now, but it'll be interesting to see when he inevitably does turn back face. Like, what does his creative look like for that? Because it's not going to be like before. He doesn't have those Shield gimmick. He doesn't have any of that anymore. So it'd be really interesting to see what that could be.
No, but it's kind of like when Moxley came over from WWE to AEW, where he was a face in WWE. You can tell he was not happy there. Comes over as John Moxley. The gimmick, for myself anyway, I didn't feel like it was that great of a gimmick. I thought, okay, yeah, I get it. It's kind of like a Steve Austin thing he's doing. But the one guy you didn't mention when talking about heels was Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Bash on the Beach, 1996, the 6-man, quote-unquote, hostile takeover match, which led heel Hulk Hogan.
Yep.
Which led to the NWO.
Oh, like, you want to see heat at a wrestling event? That's heat. Like, I don't know if the last time or the most recent vision of heat like that for me was, I've been watching a lot of GCW lately, and Matt Cardona, who used to be Zack Ryder in WWE, is wrestling there quite a bit, and he beat their GCW's main guy, GCW's Hulk Hogan, essentially. Matt Cardona beat him. The amount of garbage that got thrown in the ring after when he won, it was like, it just reminded me of that. Like, people could not believe that the brother and take your vitamins and say your prayers guy, the Hulk was going to be a bad guy.
And it wasn't like Hulk Hogan has not turned heel in the past. Like, obviously pre Hulkamania, when he was in New Japan, I guess his first run in WWE, he might have been heel. I can't confirm that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But for such a long time, and from 85 to 93, everybody always knew him as the Hulkster, knew him at Hulkamania.
Yeah. Well, it's just, you couldn't boo him.
Yeah.
It was like this, like, he was always was overcoming the odds. He was the face of the company. Like, and Vince wasn't going to turn his back on that. That's what made WWF the way that they were, was Hulk Hogan. So for WCW to turn him, and for him to be, and he might, well, obviously, I'm assuming he had full creative control for himself, so he was probably all for it.
I think at the time, from what I understand, was that Eric Bischoff had gone to him and asked him, okay, your career is kind of just not there. And I think even Hogan recently, in the last couple of days, he did a signing in Florida where he talked about Scott Hall, and he said that Scott Hall rejuvenated his career. Hulk Hogan, thanks to Scott Hall, got another, 15 years out of his career.
Oh my God, yeah.
Plus, because he turned heel. Because again, Hogan didn't want to do it, because Hogan was known as the Hulkster, and you're right, take your vitamins and all that stuff. And he was very hesitant. He was very on the fence. Okay, do I turn heel? Do I not turn heel? And at the Bash on the Beach, the creative at WCW had this idea: is that, okay, if Hogan doesn't show up, we send Sting out, and that's going to be the third man. And I often wonder, would the NWO get over if Sting was there and not Hulk Hogan?
No. Sting was the perfect later addition with the whole Crow gimmick.
Yep.
Which again was Scott Hall.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy. And so, like, yeah, like it. Oh, if you think about the time, because WCW was going for more of everything at that time was all Jerry Springer-esque.
Yeah.
It was like, how raunchy can you be, and like how provocative can you be, and stuff like that. Hogan's gimmick, you're right, was not going to last. It was going to get old real quick, no matter.
Already old. By the time he got WCW in the mid '90s, it was already, it had run its course. It's run its course, and then he had the feud. We had the feud with Ric Flair, which was just kind of what it was. But yeah, WCW, they tried everything to do everything that WWE had already done, with kind of mixed results. And they's like, okay, what can we do different?
Right.
Well, I know. Let's turn Hogan heel.
Yeah. And then look what ended up happening to all the other guys who were probably in very similar situations, like Macho Man. Again, like his whole madness gimmick was made from being in the NWO. Was Flair NWO? No. I think everyone no.
Flair wasn't. Flair was the rare exception. There was like a handful of guys: Goldberg, Sting, Ric Flair, the Steiners. Yeah, it was like there was a lot of guys. Were the Steiners in NWO? I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, there was a lot.
Scott was.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, Rick wasn't.
They tried to recruit everybody. It was kind of like an AEW with the Dark Order. They tried to recruit people, and I don't know about you, but off topic here, I just think that the Dark Order AEW has kind of just stalled out with the death of Brody Lee.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's stalled out. It was just like, okay, because I remember watching one, okay, I'm interested. I want to see where this goes. And then the news breaks, he passes away.
Yeah.
So there goes your leader. So it's like, okay, well, they're just it's kind of like WCW circa 2000. It was just there.
Yep. Yeah. Like, it's the guys in the Dark Order individually are all over, but they're over because of Dark Order. But the Dark Order, like, other than being like being available for tags and trios and stuff like that, like, you don't really see. There's no one in that group right now who's going to stand out on their own. So they kind of need this thing, and it gets over on BTE. Like, it's goofy, and it's not like when it was first kind of coming out, which was like trying to be very serious, I think, serious and dark. And I like the goofiness of it now. I like that there are a bunch of jokesters. But yeah, like, there's not really much to it now. It's just kind of there, and they're just kind of a group, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think it's very unfortunate because, again, AEW just has those groups that they're just kind of there. They're not really, with the exception of maybe the Elite. But other than that, even the Elite, in my personal opinion, is just kind of there. Like, it's cool to see the Young Bucks. It's cool to see Kenny Omega. It's cool to see these guys, but it's like, okay, that's just it.
I think this is going to be, well, it'll be interesting now, especially that AEW has Ring of Honor. It's when you have that many people on your roster, you want to get as many people on TV as possible. And so you've got to create these factions, and like some of these factions, like what we saw tonight with like Andrade and Bunny and Butcher and Blade. It's like, that seems odd. Like, it just doesn't seem like Andrade at all. But if it gets them on TV more, and it gets them to like maybe do a little something with the Hardys or something like that, awesome.
Oh, so I popped tonight when I saw the Hardys. I was like,
oh God, dude.
Oh, it's so good.
When that music hit, it was just like, they both looked a little older.
Yeah.
Or they both wrestled older.
Not like you're watching WrestleMania 17 all over.
No, sorry. I shouldn't say looked. They performed. Moves. Yeah, they were a little slower. Not Jeff. Matt's been slow for a while.
100%.
Like he can barely move now. But yeah, still, like, dude, like when that music hits, it's just like, how can you not pop? It's so good. It's so good.
Now, something I actually want to bring back up here, because you mentioned it in this episode, the Crow Sting gimmick. And of course, Scott Hall had a huge impact on me. And I think that's a gimmick that it's weird. It's one of those gimmicks that's so iconic, yet doesn't really get mentioned. When you talk about like the great gimmicks the last, I say 25 years, give or take, the Crow Sting doesn't get mentioned. And give or take, think of how many more years Sting got out of his career just because of that one gimmick, and he still does it with AEW.
He's still going today.
Yep,
and the gimmick still works today. Like it's crazy. Yeah, that gimmick I don't think gets like it was definitely the coolest when he was going after the NWO before he joined it. That was the coolest shit. Like he was up in the rafters, he was being dropped down to the ring. He would come out with a baseball bat and just swing at people, like, and he looked like a badass. He didn't look like the like American hero Sting. Like it was like this was like Sting completely reinvented himself, and the Crow thing just worked perfectly for especially for that time period, and it still works now. But yeah, definitely an underrated gimmick transformation for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, it's one of those gimmicks that doesn't get enough love or credit, just because again, Sting really reinvented himself in that, and Scott Hall is a big thing. But I said this even on Third Eye Plug. I says, you know, you talk about when the NWO first came out, they didn't have that protagonist. No. They were the antagonist, and Scott Hall was the one that said, okay, we need a protagonist to the storyline.
Yep.
And they figured Sting would be perfect. Because again, Sting had the blonde hair surfer dude. And I think kind of like Hulk Hogan with the Hulkster.
Yeah.
I think it kind of just would have run its course by the late 90s if he kept going when the NWO came in.
Yep.
But it was amazing. And I guess the final thing I want to talk about Scott Hall here, his induction into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2014, because this is something absolutely nobody thought this would ever happen, given all the problems that he had.
He was one of those guys like Jake the Snake that was just like, he's still alive.
Yep.
Like he would show up to indie shows completely bombed. Half of his gimmick in WCW was like his real life alcoholism problem. Like it's sad that like, or I guess art imitates life sometimes. But yeah, he worked with DDP, right?
Yes. Jake was like the first wrestler that worked with Diamond Dallas Page, and that's where the resurrection Jake the Snake came up. But I actually, when talking about Scott Hall and his addiction issues, the big thing that came out of it when he came back to WWE was the plane ride from hell.
Yeah.
And of course, Dark Side of the Ring already did the entire episode, which I thought, I rewatched it recently and I thought it's a good episode, but it's not a great episode. You definitely get the stories and you get that Scott Hall has definitely, like obviously he's passed away now, but even during his life, he always said that he doesn't remember what happened because he claims that he was H-bombed. Where basically, I think it was like you get a Percocet, you drop it in a beer, and it just evaporates.
Yep.
And that's what happened to him.
It was incredible that he came out of that. And I think, again, like that's the saddest part of all of this is, well, he died from 3 heart attacks after falling and breaking his hip and having complications after surgery. But yeah, like he was still actively involved with professional wrestling. Like you still saw him backstage at shows. He was still at signings. People still want to see him. Like he was still relevant, still over. And he would not have been like that if he never cleaned himself up. So it's just sad that he got taken that too soon from us, but pretty incredible that he got to that point because I think it was well deserved.
But even talking about him coming back when he was clean, and when I can't remember what WrestleMania it was, I think it was 33 or 34 when they did it at Santa Clara where the San Francisco 49ers played, and they had the match with Sting and Triple H. And of course, DX ran down to the ring to help out Triple H. And next thing you know, the NWO comes out to help Sting, which doesn't make a lick of fucking sense. I'm sorry, but it does not make a lick of sense if you ever watched any of WCW's program at the time. But it was still cool because, again, you hadn't seen Hall, you hadn't seen Nash, you hadn't seen Hogan as the NWO in 15, 16 years at that point.
Yeah.
Give or take it since 2002. This is like pre-WrestleMania 18 when The NWO broke up.
Yeah, it's that was I actually I'm recalling that moment because I remember watching that match, or I remember watching it that I remember watching Scott Hall, Nash, and Hogan come down and like top 10 surprise show up videos or something like that. And if I can recall correctly, too, the pop was insane.
Oh, it was. Obviously, when you're in an outdoor stadium in the middle of the day, it's a little different. But yeah, I do recall like the pop being pretty big. But yeah, I was just one of those moments like, yeah, it's cool to see the NWO come back, but it's just like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they come help Sting? Wouldn't that make more sense if they came back to help Triple H because of the click and everything that was going on?
That's WWF creative for you. Doesn't need to make sense. Just needs to get over, brother.
Yeah. But it's funny, even when the NWO came back in 2002, and I always thought, again, when people talk about the Invasion storyline 2001, what a missed opportunity it was because Ric Flair wasn't there. The NWO wasn't there. You see all the big names. But I always think when the NWO came over in 2002, there was a missed opportunity. Now, of course, you got to keep in mind, like, Scott Hall would have to still be with WWE. Kevin Nash wouldn't have to blown out his quads.
Yep.
Post WrestleMania 18, Hogan turns face. So now you're trying to reinvent the NWO. Well, they did it, Brock. They brought back X-Pac. Shawn Michaels got brought back. And I always thought it'd be kind of cool if those four reinvented the NWO into the Click. And now you have a storyline where they're beating everybody and you're destroying everybody. And you're trying to recruit Triple H, who is now a main event guy. But you could have a storyline where now he's pissed because of the curtain call, or he was the only one who got reprimanded for that. He was the one who lost the King of the Ring to Steve Austin. He was the guy that lost everything. So you could have had a storyline where they try to recruit him. He gets pissed off. It doesn't happen. But then Evolution comes along. So now you have the Click versus the Evolution.
Oh, yeah, that would have been pretty awesome, man. Look at you.
Right?
You work for WWE, pal.
I mean, I guess when you got Freddie Prinze Jr. as one of the writing staff, it can't be any worse than I can.
Have you listened to his podcast at all?
I haven't. No, is it any good?
It's not bad. It's not bad. It's pretty interesting. Like, he was full on. Like, he did not take it as like, it wasn't a part-time gig to him. Like, he moved to New York and he worked there and he was involved in everything. It's definitely interesting to listen to. But yeah, that's a WWE thing, man. The storylines don't have to make sense. They never do.
Now, going back to what I was saying about his Scott Hall's induction into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2014 is, of course, Jake the Snake got inducted as well. But I think that nobody really thought, again, like I said, nobody thought he would get in because of his demons. But then he gets overshadowed because the Ultimate Warrior got inducted that year. And, of course, 2 days after that, the Ultimate Warrior passes away.
Yeah. I forgot about that. I totally forgot about that because Ultimate Warrior went on Raw and did like a thing. And then, like literally 2 days later was gone.
The next day.
The next
day. He was getting into his car to go to the airport and he dies of a heart attack.
That's like, it's insane. Because Warrior was like so not involved with WWF for a long time. Like,
no, he was not.
I don't think anybody wanted anything to do with him.
Nope.
Like, because he was batshit crazy. It's kind of crazy that he goes out after getting his last conversation in a WWE ring. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, although I think the paper mask on him was kind of cheap looking, if I'm being honest. I think even in the Ultimate Warrior's book, I think the WWE did, they included that mask. Because I bought the book and it included it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, kind of cheap looking. But no, honestly, it was awesome. Like seeing some of the photos, like when he won the Intercontinental against Honky Tonk Man, which I maintain – I hated the Honky Tonk Man. I thought that's such a dumb gimmick. I was not a fan.
No, never a fan of it. Never, ever a fan of it. Like, Oh man, the thing of the gimmicks, like I like Big Boss Man.
Mhm.
I like the Genius. I liked Rick Martel. There was just so many like Tugboat, Earthquake. There's so many cheesy gimmicks back then.
Yeah,
So many cheesy gimmicks.
but there were some really badass ones like, Legion of Doom.
Legion of
The
Doom, the
first time I saw those
Barbarian.
spiked shoulder pads, because my
Yeah.
brother had those old VHSs, I was just like, oh my god, that's awesome. That was so cool looking.
Yeah, yeah, guys like Legion of Doom, the Barbarians,
Bushwhackers. Yeah,
Bushwhackers.
bushwhackers.
Yeah, no, but there were definitely some serious players back then too. But man, that time of wrestling it was interesting.
It was. Now, to close off this episode, Mike, I want to give you the opportunity to give your final thoughts. Scott Hall, in-ring performer, and what he meant to the wrestling community. Now,
Yeah, I he's an innovator for sure. Him and Kevin Nash helped wrestlers get paid. I think that's as much flack as they got back then for what they did. Wrestlers don't have the contracts they have without them doing what they did. So that's good there. Again, I said it earlier, him walking in on Nitro, that literally changed wrestling. And the good thing about Scott Hall is like that's not the only moment you'll ever remember about him. Like it wasn't just like a like he got lucky. Like this was the start of like Scott Hall becoming like the guy in a company, not having to have a title. That's maybe the other thing too. Scott Hall never had to have a title to be over. He was always going to be over. Anyway, great performer, great character performer, great professional wrestler by all accords, a great guy. Yeah, big loss for wrestling.
it is. And of course, my final thoughts on him as an in-ring performer and what he meant to wrestling. I mean, just the Monday Night Wars, everything that he's done, obviously everything that succeeded him, of course, with Bullet Club, Attitude Era, everything that came after him. I mean, he will be missed. He's one of those figures in wrestling that will be missed and will never be forgotten.
Yep, for sure.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Gr8Wyte Experience. Just a reminder, you can find the show on Twitter at Gr8Wyte Pod, as well as on YouTube and Spotify. I'm your host, Taylor Gibson, and I'll see you next time.